A lot of people know that diseases brought by Europeans when they came to the Americas in the 15th and 16th centuries devastated native populations. But did you know that this event also changed the climate of planet Earth? Native American peoples, before the arrival of Columbus, had a long history of feeding their families primarily by farming. That sometimes surprises people because we hear so many stories about scattered bands of roaming nomads in the wilderness. And although there were some tribes that were nomadic, especially in Mexico, what is now Mexico, and throughout the Amazon rainforest and so forth, the tribes there were not nomadic and actually had defined territories, and most of the people harvested a lot of maize agriculture, and in other areas corn, beans, squash, and other vegetables. And these were primary subsistence crops. In what eventually became the Aztec Empire and throughout the Mayan world, there were huge population densities. So the Aztec Empire, at the time the Spanish encountered them, were an empire of 10 million people. It was pretty huge. And with population densities like that, they had to produce a lot of food. So a significant amount of the rainforest was actually turned into farmland. Now, as Europeans sustained contact after Columbus's first voyage, then there were the introduction of all kinds of diseases that Europeans had acquired immunity to over a period of many years. So, got to imagine in the Middle East and Europe, people had domesticated pigs, goats, sheep, chickens, cows, and from the animal populations to the human populations transferred all kinds of diseases. These sometimes ravaged the populations there, but over time, those populations also developed greater immunities to them. Some became childhood diseases like measles or mumps, and others really became not much of an issue. But when native people were exposed to everything in the germ pool, they didn't have those immunities, and the things that had kind of cyclically ravaged European populations over centuries hit native people all at once. So some estimates are that 90% of the native population died. Some place the figure higher and closer to 95%. If you could imagine the 10 people on planet Earth that you love the most, and 9 out of 10 dying from disease, people got scared and ran away, which spread the disease even faster than European contact. And then the one person who survived had someone coming to take their land, to try to fight and subjugate them, and so forth. It must have been a terrible and traumatic time. But something else really interesting happened immediately afterwards that doesn't get quite as much attention from historians, and it tells us a few very telling things. So one of the things that happened is there was a mini ice age from around 1550 till around 1850. During the mini ice age, the temperature of planet Earth cooled, and there was much, much more compacted and accumulating snow during the winter months. So I live in northern Minnesota. Around here, snowshoes became a requirement rather than a recreational luxury, kind of how we see it now. We hope we'll get enough snow so that we can go skiing, snowshoeing, snowmobiling, things like that. But it used to be required just to get around during that time. And of course, the colder temperatures and higher snowfalls were well suited for animals like moose and woodland caribou, which flourished in my area, but the woodland caribou are extinct in my area, and the moose populations are really struggling from a combination of tick-borne diseases because the temperatures are warmer during the winter months and don't kill off the ticks, but also just because the entire structure and composition of the forest and lots of other things have changed with human, tree harvesting and climate change. So the mini ice age, and it tells you a couple of things, some of them a little bit counterintuitive. One is it tells us something about the devastating human loss of life during the initial contact period. But it also tells us that even in, before 1492, human beings had converted a significant amount of the rainforest to human agriculture. And when human beings did that, it warmed planet Earth. That also means that native people, who often have messages embedded in their culture about respecting life and being part of the web of life, not its masters, and so forth, that native people also had negative impacts on the environment. It might, at the year 1492, have been unknown to native people that their agricultural practices were causing climate change on planet Earth, but it was happening. And it also meant that when there was a dramatic cessation or decrease in the human, agricultural production in rainforest areas, it actually led to a dramatic cooling of planet Earth. So when we look at our current climate crises and things like that, it tells us something about the decisions that we are making, could be making, and should be making based upon the historical record. Human beings do affect the climate of planet Earth. And hopefully that can help us make wiser decisions going forward, not that they will necessarily be easy decisions to make. It also helps us put the historical record into context. I even read, for example, the journals of Zebulon Montgomery Pike, who is usually acknowledged as the first official American delegate in what is now the state of Minnesota. And in 1805, he was trying to travel from what's now the Twin Cities area up the Mississippi River. And he described the Mississippi River being frozen for his entire journey, and the snow being so deep that they had to abandon the horses and proceed by snowshoe. And so even those kind of anecdotal descriptions give you a sense for how much the climate has changed and is different. I think we can extrapolate from this also that native people had to know a lot of things. For example, how do you live in a cold weather climate? And there are all kinds of really interesting things that people learned and bodies of knowledge that they knew to adapt and survive in this environment. For example, the Ojibwe typically had a domed structure called a wigwam. So they would bend saplings over, tie them together, and they'd have a double-hulled wigwam insulated in between the two structures. And in addition to that, they would dig out the earth at the base of the wigwam, pack it with large rocks, then small rocks, then clay, and then they would take a split cedar log at the bottom of the rock pile and run it out to the air. Some people thought, oh, this must be an air intake for the hearth fire, but actually when you reconstruct the Ojibwe winter wigwam, you get something totally different. In fact, it reverses the airflow. You can pull your smoke flap, it reverses the airflow and pulls all the smoke out of your chamber, so you have a smokeless environment. The fire heats up those big rocks, and you actually have an ambient floor heat system. Completely ingenious. And it's just one of many examples of Indigenous bodies of knowledge and ways of knowing. So there's an adage that we need to learn from the mistakes of history so we aren't doomed to repeat them again. I think there's some lessons about climate change and the human imprint on the natural world that we can learn from this story. But also, everything we do as human beings is built, scaffolded upon the knowledge of previous generations. So what do we need to know about how to live in harmony with and in alignment with the natural world? And I do think that we can make the world a better place when we do that. Thanks for watching today. Miigwech.